Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show. Would you believe it? This is show 185. 185. When you compare us with the BBC, we have our longevity exceeds many of the shows that they put on, and spending £300 million a year, they say in Scotland, though we've just discovered, of course, that the bulk of that money is channeled through London, and therefore it just appears as an accounting sleight of hand that it is part of the Scottish budget. Morality clearly isn't at the top of BBC Scotland's value list. As I say every week, it's been another great day for British democracy. For example, this week we learned that, listen to this, I mean, you're not going to believe this, but it's absolutely the case. The Winter Fuel Alliance will be restored if there's a Labour government in Scotland. Now think about that. This is the legislation that all the Labour MPs voted against. They voted against it. They said it wasn't necessary and it shouldn't happen. And it didn't matter if pensioners were jeopardised at the coming winter. It was important to press ahead with this portion of austerity. That's what they said. Now we learn from the Scottish Labour leader that if he's elected, he's going to restore it, right? Now think about this. What he's actually saying, let's be clear about this, he's saying, if you vote for Scottish Labour, we will protect you from British Labour. Now, I don't know. I mean, I've been in marketing positions in many companies. I never, ever thought that was a sales strategy that would have any purchase. But it just goes to show, it's just as well I'm not in politics. What else do we learn? I scarcely credit this, but energy bills are about to rise, right? This is under the leadership of a government that said they were going to reduce energy bills. Apparently that was just an electoral promise, which of course can be regarded as null and void as soon as it's uttered. We learn that there will be no constraints, however, on British tax havens. So if you voted Labour and you have a lot of money stacked away in the Virgin Islands or the Bahamas or Bermuda or wherever, then that money is safe, right? You can spend it whenever you want. Nobody is going to check or investigate it. But if on the other hand, you want to pay for your heating, you want to eat something this winter, if you're a pensioner, then you could be, as I said, in real jeopardy. But it's okay if you've got money stashed away in a tax haven. Well, my word. And what else did we learn? We learned that Rachel Reeves, listen to this. We learned that Rachel Reeves, who is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, had her company card taken away because of misuse, that she plagiarised in her most recent book. She also falsified her CV. She said she was a senior economist. In fact, she was a customer relations officer. Hey, I've got nothing against customer relations officers, but they're not senior executives, and not any of the ones I've come across anyway. But Labour insists that she's the right person to run the economy. You know something? The way the Labour government operates, it makes Donald Trump look sane. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? Anyway, let's leave all that to one side. We've got another excellent show for you tonight. In a couple of seconds, I'm going to introduce our two guests, Leah Gunn and David Younger. And they're going to be talking to you about something which is absolutely critical. And if you want to get your constitutional juices flowing, you really don't want to miss this show tonight. So without any further ado, let me introduce Leah Gunn and David Younger. How are you both?
We're fine. Thank you very much for having us.
Well, thanks, John. Very well.
Good, good. And where are you joining us from tonight, Leah?
I'm in Edinburgh.
And David?
I'm on the shores of Loch Fyne in Carroll.
Oh, look at that. See, there's so many people would love to be in your position just now, regardless of the weather, right? I know we always say Scotland is great, but what about the weather? Scotland is great. Full stop.
It is snowing, John.
Oh, come on, David. Christmas is coming.
Well, it is winter.
So why don't we kick off? Leah, if you'd like to start, please tell us a bit about yourself, how you got involved in what you're about to tell us about, and why it's important to you and to David.
Right. Well, I've lived in Edinburgh for 7 years, and I lived from the mid-80s to late 90s in London for 14 years. So I'm a dual citizen. Moved most recently from New York to Edinburgh in 2017. And pretty soon got involved in the Scottish independence debate or movement, call it what you like, because I could see right away that Scotland could be so much better than in fact it was. And it was better in 2017 than it is now, believe it or not. I think we've gone downhill since then. We've left the European Union, and the S&P has fallen apart, mainly through their own fault. It's their own fault. So I can just see that as an outsider too, with, I guess, fresh eyes. I don't know how fresh they are anymore, but I could see that Scotland could, if they were running its own affairs, it has such natural wealth, it has talented people, it has everything to succeed as a small Nordic nation. And you look over at Norway and Denmark and all the other Nordics, and you see Scotland compared to them, and it just makes your heart sink. And I guess I'm a little bit surprised that people are not more angry. I know people feel rather beaten down, and they say, we've been in this for 300 years, we've been a bit brainwashed, or we've been conditioned to think that, you know, we can't have independence or we don't need it. And I think it's that colonial mentality. I think Alf Baird's done a lot of great work to uncover, you know, the sort of psychological aspect of that.
Yeah.
But I do think that, you know, we have to keep working and trying to convince people that they have the power. Popular sovereignty means power rests with the people. We just don't have the tools to exercise that power. And that's what we have to demand of the Scottish administration. I will not call it a government. It's not a government. And we want to talk about the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which the UK ratified almost 50 years ago in 1976, but is not put into UK law for very clear reasons, because it would give people political rights. It would also give them, the Article 1 says, is the right to self-determination. All the things the UK doesn't want Scotland to have. But we have to keep pushing on that. And I think people are accepting that we are a colony and that there is such a thing as popular sovereignty. But what is that? What does it mean? And how can we actually exercise it? And that's what we'll talk about tonight.
Excellent. These are great questions. David, would you like to add to that?
I think Leah's done a very good job of explaining it. The only thing I think I would add to that is that we have a serious problem in understanding what self-determination actually is. And that's what we're trying to put forward, both with the ICCPR and with our general activity towards respect Scottish sovereignty, is to allow people to understand that they can speak from the ground up and their voice is heard and it matters. That's what we're trying to put in place. I'll leave a lot of the stuff to Leah because she's better explaining it than I am, but that is my view.
Okay, let me. I'm going to be devil's advocate, because otherwise it's not much of a show. It comes out like some sort of mutual admiration society, and nothing wrong with that. It's just that we need to get to the root of these things. What would you say to people, Leah, who said, "Well, you know, popular sovereignty sounds great, and it's terrific that it's ratified by the British government, even though it's not in law, but nonetheless, as Stephen Flynn has pointed out on this programme, real sovereignty," I don't think he used quite that expression, sovereignty in the UK, he said, rests with the Crown and Parliament.
That's the problem. You know, Stephen Flynn is part of the colonial administration. He's sitting down in Westminster, and they're not going to make a single bit of impact down there. They should come home. They should have come home when we had a majority of S&P, so-called independent supporting MPs down there. Now we're reduced to 9. What are they doing there? I mean, it's a total waste of time. Holyrood, let's face it, Holyrood is a Westminster mini-me. It's based on parliamentary sovereignty. And so that's their mindset. Naturally, they'll say that. And Stephen Flynn, you know, now wants to double dip and be an MSP as well as an MP. Yeah, great, fantastic. Get that pension pot nice and full and, you know, warm 2 benches. But that's not what the Scottish people need. So we really have to, you know, devolution has been a complete failure. Tony Blair said not so long ago that Devolution had to happen. This is a direct quote. Otherwise, you would leave Scottish people with a choice of the status quo or independence. And Scotland is still part of the UK, which was part of the design. So devolution has worked as far as I'm concerned. And that was all planned. So we were trapped in this devolution cul-de-sac. And there's only one way to reverse out of that, and that is to get people to understand that the power actually rests with them and that politicians will do nothing unless you light something under their you-know-what and get them to start moving.
So how do you light something under their you-know-what? What's the best way of doing
all
that?
Politics is local, as some great American said. I think it was Tip O'Neill. And so the whole idea behind Respect Scottish Sovereignty is to get localized units, call them what you like, hubs, units, groups of citizens, and coming together over issues that are of concern to them in their local area. For example, in Angus, the pylons are an issue. It could be a housing development that you don't want. It could be a number of things. It could be the free ports here in Edinburgh. It could be something smaller. It could be, the horrible state of the roads. You pick your issue and you get people to come around, and then you say, this is how we can address it. We can actually make an impact. We should have these rights. It was ratified by the UK government. Direct political rights, which is the right to a referendum, the right to initiatives, and you can actually impact and hold government to account.
So, let me get this right then. Are you suggesting that, I'm not sure who would do this, but that a referendum could be held even though the London government, the Westminster government, said it was illegal, because that's what they would say.
Well, what you could do, actually, what we're asking Holyrood to do is to incorporate into Scots law the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that would give us these political rights, or at least some of them, for devolved legislation. And we have a petition that we've submitted to the Public Petitions Committee to that effect, and we're waiting to hear back from them. But while they're dithering and not responding to us, well, why not? Why couldn't we organize a referendum, local referendum on an issue, and use David's platform, Scotland Decides, to conduct a vote and make something of that? If people feel that they can actually start flexing their muscles in terms of getting their voices heard by their local politicians, and then let these MSPs and even the MP and your local councillors and everyone else know what you're doing, then I think we can maybe start making some inroads. And also it gives people a bit of confidence that there are tools out there that we can start utilizing. And frankly, it's like the Sky Bridge campaign. Andy Anderson brings this up. He brought it up on your show. That Westminster can pass a law or not pass a law. And if the people don't go along with it, there's nothing they can do.
Well, they can use the police and the military to enforce that law.
Not if there are enough of us. They're going to throw us all in jail?
How do you feel about going to jail, David?
I'm not going to go into history here. I would emphasize what Leah has been saying, and that is that if the will of the Scottish people can be demonstrated, whether it be at local, regional, or national level, it leaves the powers that be no alternative but to say we're either on your side, the people we're supposed to represent, or we're on the other side, which is
okay. That's great in theory, David. But let me introduce a note of practicality here, if I may. It would be illegal for the civil service, either locally and or nationally, to support any referendum which Westminster deemed to be ultra vires.
Yes, but
so who would organise the vote?
Well, we can do it through the voting app, and I can explain exactly how that app works. But
please.
I don't think we've got enough time tonight to do it. But I certainly will.
Just take 2 or 3 minutes to broadly sketch out what it is.
Well, basically, the app is blockchain enabled. It's covered internationally. It uses a platform which does have international recognition. It's currently used in 5 American states. which will shortly become 7, is currently used in Canada, in Mexico, and it was used for a general election in Sierra Leone. They have international recognition. It is a very, very secure system. If we hold a national vote on the basis of whether we want independence or whatever it happens to be, we can prove that it is viable, it is legal, it works.
Well, hold on a second. You say it's legal, but if the prevailing authority deems it to be illegal, on what basis do you declare it legal? What's your authority for declaring it legal?
Well, I think we can say that to Westminster in 2018, on July 4th, actually, in 2018, the House of Commons went along and agreed that the claim of right is extant and that the Scottish people are sovereign. So how can then they reconcile that with the Scottish sovereign people saying that they want a change to the constitutional settlement, for example, or change to something smaller, maybe something to reverse the decision of SSEN, the private energy company, to deface large parts of the Highlands with these horrible pylons.
Yeah.
Or whatever the issue might be. We have to put a stick in the brick wall and make a hole somewhere. You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to, I think, start local on some of these local issues and work your way up. And as people gain confidence, as people understand that they can actually make a difference, then that's how you build a movement. You see, right now we need an army, and we haven't assembled the army.
Yeah.
And that will take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Of course, it's going to take time. And people have to get used to the notion, too, that we say that popular sovereignty exists. Our politicians pay lip service to it. John Swinney said, give the Scottish people the tools and they can build whatever future they want. He said that at the SNP conference in September. Well, John, you haven't given us the tools, right? But we can fashion our own tools. So we're going to go ahead and do it and show you how it's done.
I think that's laudable. My concern remains, though, that the fundamental reality is that at some stage something has to happen. Let's say there is a vote, and you get everything you wish, David and Leah, and there is a vote, and the Scottish people vote yes, agree with your sentiments by one vote. For me, I just cannot conceive of any circumstances where the UK government would support that, because it would say, no, we don't accept that. We want to rerun it now. We're not denying your sovereignty argument. We're concerned about the way you did it. And we want to clear the situation. And so therefore we'll organise a vote. And surely you have no problem with that.
Well, then people can boycott it. I mean, come on. It's not beyond the wit of man to figure out a way to get around the sleeked UK government.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you the other thing they will do, I suspect, and I claim no great foresight in saying this, because they did it in India and they did it elsewhere, which is to say, I'll tell you what, we agree with your basic sentiment, but the timing is not good just now. We're in the middle of austerity. We've got all these other problems. We've got Trump, etc. What we'll do is we'll come back and address it in a few years' time, because that's the technique that they generally use. Never say no, just say no right now. And then they put it off.
John, we can't ask anymore. We have to take. You know that as well as I do.
Yeah.
You don't go sup on bended knee to Westminster. You just take it.
Let me ask you, David. One of the processes that the Westminster government might utilise in order to manage the situation, i.e., you're heading for a referendum. There's tremendous public support for it, but the SNP is opposed to it, because that's a likely outcome. What do you do then?
I wouldn't be in the slightest bit surprised if the SNP opposed it. What I am concerned about, this is an argument that I have raised and we're still talking about, and it's being carefully analysed at the moment, is that, in my view, the SNP MSPs in Holyrood have no constitutional value whatsoever. As Leah put it, Holyrood is an extension of the Westminster Parliament, nothing more. However, there are 57 MPs in Westminster who effectively represent Scotland. Our proposal is over, say, a 2-year period in the course of a national convention or something of similar name. We bring those MPs round to the fact that we expect them to represent the interests of their constituents and not their political party. Now, from where we're sitting at the moment, that doesn't sound like it's going to work very well. But take my word for it, with enough pressure from the Scottish people, from the project that RSS and we are proposing, there will be substantial influence from the Scottish people. They will bring the MPs on board to the point where they have to represent Scottish interests. And I'm in no doubt about that. If anybody wants to raise an argument with me online, I will happily talk about it forever. But at the moment, we only have an hour. And in my view, that will work. Constitutionally, internationally, it's excellent because it bypasses the entire Westminster system. The Westminster government can't say no to us. The Supreme Court has no jurisdiction whatsoever. And our only avenue is directly to the international community. 22 of whom, in my recent requests for information, have stated quite specifically that they will recognize Scotland from day one as an independent nation. So,
on what basis? A referendum held by whom?
Well, do you want the names? I can give you some of the names.
No. Would we have a vote here in Scotland is what he's asking.
I mean, on what basis? What form of vote would predicate their acceptance?
Well,
anybody.
Example, well, let's say we examine a number of issues like the power companies. I mean, do we want to nationalize them? Yes, maybe we do. Are we allowed?
We can come on to that. You said earlier that 20 odd countries would recognize what? Simply somebody standing up and saying, I declare myself sovereign, or what would they be recognizing?
They would be recognizing as Scotland as a proto-independent state, at which point we are putting the machinery in place.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But these 20 odd nations would be recognizing what? A state, what is the constitutional status of that state? I.e., is it predicated upon a vote of some kind? Or simply somebody saying, I'm free? What is it?
It's predicated on a vote and on the recognition of that vote by the 57 MPs in Westminster. They are very, very important. I know we don't like politics, but they are actually very important.
But hold on a second, David. Surely the majority in Westminster, when consulted, would say no.
Yes, but they've got no say in the matter. This is between Scotland and England under the terms of the Treaty of Union. The Treaty of Union involves. I
hate to rain on your parade, but the reality is, if you take that to the international community, precious few states would actually, of the states that you need to recognize you, would recognize you. I mean, I can't imagine Spain, France, Germany recognizing an independent state on the basis of what you just described.
Well,
they would want to see a situation where the present state had some form of agreement to the separation of part of it. That's the way they would see it. Not the way you and I would see it, but that's how I suspect they would see it.
Well, it's very interesting you bring the point up, John, because this goes back to 2005 when I was I was going to say in a meeting. No, we weren't. We were down at a pub in Salzburg, and I had two former ICJ judges in my field at the time, and we were talking about Scotland, and I said that Scotland exists as a result of a treaty of union, which effectively means that the Scottish element could, if it so desired, remove itself from that treaty. I was greeted with absolute shock. Quite simply, neither of these people, who were both ex-ICJ judges, actually realized that Scotland was in a treaty agreement with England. So what we're putting forward here, which the international community will definitely recognize, is that Scotland is a separate nation. It's not a separate nation state, but it is a separate nation, and it is bound by treaty. So what we have to do is remove ourselves from that treaty if we want to go forward into independence. Once that issue is explained, then everybody comes on board. Everybody.
Okay, let me be devil's advocate for a bit longer. Surely the best way of dissolving a treaty is for both parties to agree upon it, which is what Alex Salmond sought to achieve. And the reason he did that, I suspect, is because he had an eye, a very clear eye, on the international community. And he wanted to be able to say, look, we both agreed to this divorce. It wasn't just me, both parties agreed to it. So let's have no further discussion on that basis. I want to go forward as a free and independent partner of what used to be a partnership. That's clear, no equivocation, because both parties agreed. What you're suggesting is that one of the parties is going to walk away and the international community is going to say, oh, that's just fine. I'm very happy with that.
Actually, they are. You're right. You take a look at the Vienna Convention of 1979 and you'll see it's there in black and white.
Okay, name one country that would fit the description of what you've just told us. Just one.
In what respect?
Well, there was a partnership, a union, and one of the partners walked away, declared itself separate, and the international community gathered around it and said, fantastic, that's great.
There is no example in the world of the kind of treaty that we are in here in Scotland. None. But there are plenty of treaties that involve other developments, other cooperation, which have been dissolved simply by one party or the other removing themselves from it. There's plenty of examples.
But those, with the greatest of respect, those generally involved a degree of violence.
No, not really.
Not removing yourself from a treaty, not necessarily. You can walk away from a treaty just like the United States has walked away from several arms control treaties.
Sure, absolutely. And when you're the biggest guy in the block, you can do these things. I'm suggesting we're not the biggest guy in the block, and therefore we have to go along with the flow. We have to accommodate international sentiment.
Well, can I just throw something in the works? Then I think the status or the reputation of the United Kingdom internationally is actually not great. And the state of the UK, I would say, is parlous, to use a polite word. And I think, we would have probably sympathy in England. I think the English aren't terribly happy with Westminster, the Welsh. That's where we come back to these international treaties, the human rights treaty that the UK ratified back in 1976. Look at the Labour government, or I call them ELINO, English Labour and Name Only government, under Starmer and Reeves, and they're just they're completely incompetent. They're completely bought out by corporate interests. That's who they're serving, the City of London. They don't care about the people here in the UK. So what I'm saying is, I think that the UK is on a shoogly peg, as the Scots would say, I don't think it's going to persist in its current form for that much longer. It's undermining itself.
Yeah, I agree with that.
People are very disillusioned. So in a sense, if we can get England and Wales, and that's why the international treaty that has not been implemented by the UK government that would actually give these people political rights as well, maybe we can push from all three directions at Westminster.
Let me ask you a question from Evelyn Hume. Evelyn is asking, how do we leave the treaty without support in Parliament and permission of the people?
You want me to answer that?
Please.
The answer is that with the agreement of the people, and that's the very first thing, of course, we have to have the people on board to say we are leading the treaty. Then we have the right to recall 57 MPs from Westminster because they represent Scottish constituencies. Those 57 MPs are all that's left of the original agreement in the Treaty of Union. They represent Scotland. Now, if Scotland can't enforce its own position constitutionally, then, as Leah has been pointing out, and we're pointing out here, then that means the Scottish people have no right to self-determination. And that's an offence. Simple as that.
Okay, let's take your point. It's an offence, right? We all three agree that it's an offence, right? What happens when there's an offender, generally, is the police move in and say to the offender, you have to change your behaviour because you're offending, and the police will enforce that if necessary. Who is going to enforce this? Okay, they're offending, they've broken the treaty, so what? What happens then?
Well, I just want to ask you one question here, John. I have thought about the situation of the police and the armed forces, because we don't have control over either. That control is in the hands of the UK government. But let's assume that the police come out on the streets. Let's assume that the armed forces turn up in town after town, fully armed, guns at the ready. How long do you think that situation would last for the Scottish people?
Well, it could last forever. It lasted for 600 years in Ireland. I mean, I have a problem with all of this, with respect, David. My worry is that what you're suggesting is that at some point this is going to be resolved through violence, and that troubles me, because
I don't think that's what we're saying at all.
Well, you're talking about the police, and you're talking
we're
about...
sort of almost getting ahead of ourselves. What we were talking about initially is local action, getting small groups around the country organized and formed to look at local problems and start exercising.
I agree with that.
Political rights, and that's how you build a movement. And then it's going to take time. The Skye Bridge campaign took 9.5 years.
Absolutely, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. All I'm suggesting to you is that you need to have answers to these questions, because if you start any sort of movement, right? You need it's human nature. If you want to change and help people, as you do, and I agree you do, invariably the people who are opposed to change, and there are many of those, including the state and including the Scottish government, I suspect, will marshal arguments to oppose what you're proposing. That's the way things work generally.
We have our own legal system in Scotland, and the UK Supreme Court doesn't have any jurisdiction over Scottish matters, right? So if we're dealing with devolved Scottish issues, the Supreme Court really doesn't have a say.
Well, it doesn't have to have a say. The reality is that under the British Constitution... they
don't have a constitution. There's nothing written down.
No, but nonetheless...
I don't think you can refer to it as a constitution. I
would agree with that too. It's not a constitution in the terms that most people would understand that term. I mean, I've spent years trying to encourage the Scottish government to produce a constitution, and eventually the SNP did. But
it needs to be done by the people.
Of course it does, and it needs to be put to the people. And the great sadness is it's never been put to the people, and therefore the people's view has never been recorded, and it's a great pity because most independence movements, if I can digress for a second, are predicated upon a constitution. That's the way you go forward. To try and go forward towards independence without a constitution is plain nuts. But then again, let's leave that to one side. The reality is that whatever we think of it, and however uncodified it might be, the authorities are bound by where the sovereignty presently exists legally in the UK, and that's the Crown and Parliament. So they will be conditioned by that, and that primarily. So as soon as you get in order to get any traction, you have to get some sort of agreement across the board. And if you've got the Scottish government aligned against you, and you've got the Westminster government aligned against you, what are the arguments that you plan to use to change their minds and come in behind?
Well, why have they both said, both Holyrood and Westminster have acknowledged that the Scottish people are sovereign? Are they just, empty air, empty words, having nothing behind? Yeah, okay, fine. Well, what we're doing is we're putting some heft behind those words. We are building our own tools because Holyrood is probably not going to give them to us. Westminster certainly isn't going to give them to us. So we have to energize the Scottish people from the ground up and let them lead this revolution. I'm not talking about a violent revolution, but I am talking about a revolution. It's a revolution in the way Scotland thinks of itself and the people think of themselves, actually empowering them for once to think that they can actually make change and not just have to sit back and rely on a completely effete and ineffectual and disappointing so-called independence party that has let Scotland down time and again.
Yeah.
Politicians have failed us. It's now time for the people to take it into their own hands. And it's not easy. It's going to be really hard, but we have to try.
Okay.
Sorry,
David?
can I just jump in here, John? In the light of what I said, I don't want anybody to take it that I am perfectly comfortable with violent insurrection, because I'm certainly not. All I'm saying is that if the English authorities want to stop independence, having been passed by a vote by Scots and then been recognised as a vote by Scots, if they want to stop it, they would have to indulge in activity which would bring the vast majority of Scots down to the issue of independence.
With the greatest of respect, that is, please don't be upset. That is naive. The way colonial administrations operate is that they would sow unrest in order to have the police on the streets. They're not going to sit and wait. They're going to send the police and the army. They're going to make sure that people start setting fire to things and all sorts of stuff as an excuse to send the army, and that's the way it works. So
yeah, well, I don't think that is a situation in itself that would occur. You can see it historically in places like India. I mean, can
we get back to talking about what we're trying to do with respect Scottish sovereignty? We've actually provided a draft petition to the Public Petitions Committee in Holyrood, and they are looking at it. They asked us to, we submitted one, it was rejected. They said that we needed to be more precise, that the ICCPR, the UN covenant, would apply just to devolved legislation. So we've corrected that. It does. Section 5 of the Scotland Act 1998, I don't know if Kevin is listening, you can put that up on the screen, explicitly says, thanks to Donald Dewar, that Scotland can implement, no, that's Article 25, Section 5 of the Scotland Act 1998, that it is not a reserved power, that we can implement human rights, international human rights agreements, which we did with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Westminster, the UK Supreme Court said we had to modify that legislation from Holyrood to say that it doesn't pertain to UK legislation that is in Scotland, which it weakens it somewhat, but at least we have something on the rights of the child in Scottish legislation, which they don't in UK legislation. And that's, again, one of the limits of devolution. Westminster always trumps whatever we might decide to do, which is what we're trying to wriggle our way out of somehow. And you've got to create a chink of light somewhere. And this is one way we think that it can be done educating Scots about their power, giving them a little bit of power so they can try to exercise it, whether or not Holyrood gives it or not, say that this right exists in international law and the UK has ratified it. Let's see what we can do with it on a local level. So that's kind of how we're approaching things. And Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. And this is not going to happen quickly. I wish it would, but I'm realistic. It's going to take time.
Yeah, it would take time. And it also needs some very clearly and coherent arguments that deal with some of the points we've been discussing tonight. Because these are about, it's so much easier when you oppose something. I applaud everything you're trying to do, but I know the reality of real politics.
We are for the Scottish people. That we're actually not, this is actually a positive campaign. This is about giving the sovereign Scottish people the tools to exercise their sovereignty. That's a very positive campaign.
Sorry, yes, David.
Yeah, I would, I want to back up Leah on this point. Wholeheartedly. I think we have unfortunately jumped forward. What we're doing is we're setting up a situation where Scottish people actually understand that they have the power of self-determination. That's a long process. We've only set up one hub at the moment. We're hoping to set up a lot more, but that will encourage people to believe that they can make changes at a local level. And these are local changes. It might be something like a housing development that somebody doesn't want. It might be the power companies and pylons. It's not a massive international or national campaign. So
I understand that.
A lot of the discussion that we've had has gone beyond that point.
Yeah, I understand. But you do take my point. That if you seek to change minds, you ought to be in a position to be able to answer some of these questions clearly and cogently, regardless of whether you're at the infancy or you're midway through the process or near the end. You need to provide answers. That's all I'm saying.
Well, a very clear answer is when you talk about political rights, we're talking about really direct democracy, which is the only governance form that fits popular sovereignty, if you think about it. And decentralized direct democracy would fit Scotland like a glove. You look at a country like Switzerland, where they have each canton has its own constitution. They have the federal as well. They have referendums and initiatives all the time. The people hold the taxation. More than half the taxes are generated at the local and regional level in Switzerland. They have a lot of power. Everything, the subsidiary principle, subsidiarity, anything that can be done at the lowest level should not be at a higher level.
I agree with all of that, and we've talked in earlier shows about direct democracy, and it's laudable.
That's what this is all about. That's what this is about.
Absolutely. But the key is in the name of Switzerland, which is Confederation Helvetica. So in other words, it's a confederation. It is constitutionally constructed in order to achieve the very aims that you've just
Absolutely.
stated.
And that's the kind of constitution that Scotland has.
Precisely. And we're a million miles from that.
We are, of course. We have to have aspirations.
Yeah. Here's a question we've had, which I think... Sorry?
We have to have a starting place.
Of course, absolutely. But let me tell you how far you have to travel. Here's a question from Jock Gibson. It's actually for me, but I'm going to devolve it to you because we've been talking about devolution. What's the difference between a citizen and a sovereign, in brackets, living as a being in Scotland?
Can I answer that one?
Please.
I have had quite a lot of interaction with Jock Gibson. And he makes the point, actually, sort of correctly, that if we talk about citizens, we're not talking about the same thing as the people. It's an argument of semantics, John. As simple as that. If you're a citizen of a country, the implication is that you do whatever that country decides that you should do because you're a citizen. If you're a member of the public in general within that country, whatever you decide doesn't necessarily have to accord with what the government determines that you should do. You could have that argument for hours, but I know that Jock Gibson has made points about that in the past, and to some limited extent, I've accepted what he's saying, but it is semantics. Okay.
Well, I mean, I agree with most of that, by the way. So here we have a situation where your movement is starting to grow. People are attracted to it because it makes so much sense to them. They see a vacuum amongst the Scottish government and the SNP, and they're saying, these people are talking to my needs much more than these other groups are, and we're supportive. But there will come a time at some stage where if you take the 50 odd MPs who happen right now to be from a unionist party, they will never agree to what we've just been discussing. And I know your larger point was at some stage they will be replaced by SNP MPs who might take a very different view, one hopes. But even then, right, there's no guarantee of that. So the question is, okay, you're moving towards a referendum, but it's not endorsed by the MPs, it's not endorsed by the Scottish government. Where does it go? Where do you go from there?
Well, first of all, you said something about being replaced by SNP MPs. I never said that. I think given the state of the SNP at the moment, it's probably very unlikely that it'll be replaced by SNP MPs. The question really is whether those MPs who represent Scottish constituents in Westminster are prepared to act on the instructions of their constituents. Now, it's a long process. If we talk about a national convention, it's going to be 2 years before we reach that stage, at least. It's a long, long process. And it's not something which, to be quite honest, in the light of this evening's conversation, I think Leah and I really want to get into. I can give you a very detailed explanation. I mean, 3 years of research on my part have gone into how a convention would actually work and how we would bring the MPs on board. But I could spend the next hour telling you, and doubtless you would have plenty of comments to make in between time. But what we're talking about here is grassroots democracy. And that's what we really want to put forward to the people now, right now. Okay. And that is a way that we can build up self-determination at local level. And Leah can tell you.
You have to walk before you can run, and we need to build the foundation stones, and it always starts locally. It starts with the people, and exactly. as for the unionist parties down in Westminster, I've always believed that one day when Scotland does become independent, because I think it will, I just don't know how long it's going to take. We will have our own Tories, Labour, Greens. Monster. I want to have a Loch Ness monster raving loony party. I think that'd be great. We're going to have a full political spectrum of views in an independent Scotland, just like you do in any country. Yep. So maybe these guys will eventually realize, even the Tories and Labour and Lib Dem ones down there in Westminster, someday, if they live long enough, that they're better off in an independent country. Come home to Scotland, do your thing here rather than down in London where it's falling apart anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the point which I think is your larger point, which is that independence will probably come through the collapse of the administration in Westminster. I think that's possibly a quicker ending than any other. It doesn't do any harm.
We can also apply pressure here, and I think in the process we're educating the Scottish people about their rights. They actually have these rights. They are sovereign. It is in the Claim of Right. Westminster has acknowledged it, and it's a process. It is a process,
and I would commend to you the lexicon, which most people in Scotland do not have. I mean, we have a question just now from Alexandra Bryden. She said we need to be educated in what sovereignty means. and the idea and meaning that's been stolen from us. We also need to get the whole concept of the difference between a citizen and a subject clarified, and also to understand what a constitution is and why it's important. I can tell you that there's precious few people inside the SNP who are in any way, shape or form in a position where I would say these people understand the importance of these things. There just isn't that understanding. Or if there is, it's not something that they attach great value to. So
there's a new booklet that's just come out that I helped contribute to. A lot of people did. It's a grassroots book. It's Project Our Growth, How We Take Back Our Independence. And one of the first chapters is on sovereignty.
Good.
And so people can go to Project Our Growth and just Google that. It will come up and you can order copies. It just came off the presses literally a few days ago.
Well, let's just deal with that in a little bit more detail, if we may. How do people get in touch with you, your organization? Say, for example, there's a bunch of people watching and listening right now who say, this is fascinating. Listening to David and Leah makes me feel I want to support them. How do they do that? What do they do? What's the first step they need to take?
Okay, well, you see on the bottom of the screen, respectscottishsovereignty.scot, which is where you can find information on direct democracy. David's Scotland Decides will be linked with that, which is the voting platform. And I run a blog called Dear Scotland. It's dearscotland.substack.com, where I do a lot of articles on a wide range of issues, but I do a lot on direct democracy and the topics that we've been discussing this evening as well. And today I just did one on Project Our Growth, on the booklet on how to get it, so people can go and check that out.
That's cool. We've had a question. Yes, David.
Sorry, John. And we can put you in direct touch with Andy Anderson, who has actually done more work at the local level than we have done.
We're a small group of people. There are just a handful of us who comprise Respect Scottish Sovereignty, at this little group level. But Andy, David is right, is actually putting together in North Ayrshire some units, and he wants to wait until he gets us established, and then we can expand them to other parts of Scotland, and we already have some areas in mind.
Yeah. In fact, I think Margaret Mead it was who said that
it only takes a small group of people to change the world. Is all that ever has, right?
All that ever has. Exactly. A lovely quote. And I wish I'd remembered it accurately, but thank goodness you did. And it is true. I mean, I found that time and time again. But it needs tenacity, and it needs to all the other things we've been talking about. Just a quick question. So that's how people contact you. If they want to support you financially, can they do that too?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
No, it's a serious question because you must have expenses.
There's a donate page on Scotland Decides.
Good.
All donations are shared equally with RSS.
Now, Jock Gibson has come back just very briefly and said, there ain't no difference between a living being in Scotland on both statuses get treated the same way. I don't know. Let's forget that. Well, let me raise a different point with you. Henry has pointed out that Salvo is taking the Scottish case to the international court, and they reckon that all that's needed is 5%, 51% in order to establish sovereignty. So it looks like what you're doing aligns closely with some of the work that's taking place elsewhere.
Yeah, no, of course it does. And, we all need to work together. We all have the same goal in mind. And what we're trying to do is do something, local, grassroots, and start something, the little spark that actually, spreads, because it's a good idea and it empowers people. That's how all good ideas, if this is a good idea, and I think it is, that's how things will spread when people see it starting to work, and then they feel empowered and they gain confidence, and then other people take it up. So it grows sort of organically from the bottom.
One thing that struck me is that it's so much easier if you have a cause célèbre, i.e. if you have one particular issue that strikes and resonates with people.
Yeah.
Is there anything you have in mind that might do that?
Well, we've been focusing on giving us our rights, our international human rights, which the UK government ratified, but hasn't done anything about. That to me is pretty important for everyone. giving
Sure.
us the tools to actually exercise self-determination and popular sovereignty and stop bad legislation and get rid of politicians we don't like and do all the things that, anger us, that we feel impotent and frustrated because we can't do that right now.
It isn't. Let's take your point about getting rid of the politicians we don't want. One of the challenges there is that as soon as you say vote for somebody else, what you do is you split the vote and you allow the unionist parties to have even greater control over things.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm talking about, when we have those political rights in an independent Scotland, like they do in Switzerland. If someone isn't up to mark, they just toss them out. And, and now I think we can demand a higher quality. And if people aren't going to be supporting, if our politicians are not going to be supporting the people and the people's right to exercise their sovereignty, then we need to replace them with other people. Why not?
Isn't the key? Let me put this point to you, David. Isn't the key, based on what Leah just said, to promote the whole concept of direct democracy, so that the politicians are less essential to the process, and that the people have more direct control over their future?
I'm glad you brought that point up, John, because that is my view. I started off some time ago with pretty much what Leah said, is that we don't like them, we get rid of them. The answer to that is that you trade one bad person for another. And I think that the whole concept of direct democracy is that we say to the politicians, look, you're supposed to be there to represent us. If you don't, we have other means to carry ourselves forward. And
but you can also vote them out of office. I mean, that works too.
Yes, it does.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
I mean, one thing what does a politician want more than anything in the world? They want to get reelected. At least from my experience, that's what they want. And if you threaten them with, oh, you're not going to get reelected. I mean, look how successful APAC has been, unfortunately, some of these big lobby groups in the United States. But we need to return that power, take it away from the lobbyists and the corporations, give it to the people.
Yeah, I would endorse all of that.
If we go down that route, then the power of popular sovereignty, the power of democratic ability on the part of ordinary people is enough to keep these politicians relatively honest. I wouldn't say totally honest, but relatively.
Henry Ferguson, who's also part of our group, has said to me, because he lives in Switzerland, has for 50 years, he said the Swiss politicians actually refer to the Swiss people as the sovereign. Wouldn't it be great if we could get to that point in Scotland?
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, it would be a godsend. We've only got a couple of minutes to go. You've got 30 seconds each. If there's anything that you wanted to cover tonight, we haven't had a chance to cover, you've got 30 seconds. David, starting with you. Is there anything you want to say in the concluding few seconds?
I'm not sure that I have. You've given me the opportunity to say an awful lot, John, more than I thought you would give me the opportunity to say.
Okay.
All I can say here is that we are dedicated to the idea of popular sovereignty, of local democracy, and that is what we're going to take forward. We've only just started. We've only taken one step on the road, and we need the support of Scottish people. As Leah says, there's a lot of generals and very few troops. So we have to add an army now to this.
Leah, you've got 30 seconds. Okay,
we're putting together Respect Scottish Sovereignty, an advisory group of names, top names here in Scotland, people who are well respected and known, and we'll be releasing that in due course. So that will give our organization a little bit more heft and maybe recognition. So, but thank you for the opportunity to let us speak this evening. We're really grateful for it.
Thanks, John. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Good. Thank you both. Our aim is to inform, educate, and entertain, and you guys have done all of that tonight. Well, thank you very much to David and to Leah. If you can stick around for a few seconds after we go off air, that would be terrific. To everyone out there, please take the chance to support Indie Live. You'll see that there's you can go on the YouTube. You can sign up for that. Tell all your friends. Tell them to take a subscription. Every single penny that you provide for Independence Live is a step in the right direction. It allows us to talk to people like David and Leah in a way for a whole 60 minutes. You wouldn't get anywhere else. Believe me, this is not going to happen anywhere else, right? Because nobody is going to give people who want to change things like Leah and David do the facility to do so. So we're terribly grateful that they're joining us tonight. But the platform that we're using tonight depends very much upon everyone watching and listening. We'd appreciate anything you can provide. I know Christmas is coming and there's a big demand on people's resources, but please subscribe and send whatever you can. We deeply appreciate it. Stay safe, take care, and look out for Peter Bell next week, same time, 7 p.m. Wednesday. Good night all, take care.